Well, thanks for joining us.
No problem.
Tarah?
Great to be here.
You may not remember this, but we've met on a couple of occasions.
Mm-hmm.
And the very first time we met was at the George's restaurant in Collins Street.
Yes.
And you were a guest at one of our luncheons.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, I do remember that.
And it was delightful having you there. And one of the things that always stayed with me and I'm thinking we might have even been pre-COVID. It was that long ago, or if it wasn't, it was...
I reckon, I think it was almost just after COVID.
Was it?
Yes, because I think we were talking about some of the lessons we learnt from COVID.
Yeah, it was
memory.
about COVID.
Yeah.
And one of the comments you made, all I remember is that the team itself, I think it may have still been under Bolts as the coach at that point in time. And the team itself was getting close to winning and then they never quite got across the line.
Yeah.
And your comments at the time were, they've forgotten how to win. So it has stayed with me for whatever number of years that is. Can you just take me through that? I mean, you know, because I think that ability to win or that ability to want to succeed is relevant both in a football club as much as it is in a business. So take me through how you generate or how you overcome that in people if they've got a fear of success almost.
I mean, we sort of talk about, fear of success, fear of failure, and exploring what people find threatening. Winning and losing can both be threatening. Threatening in terms of for individuals and their own sort of self-esteem, self-worth, ego, but also, I guess, at that, the team social level in terms of letting other people down. Even it sort of reminds me this morning on my way in, and I don't know if the boxer from the Olympics last night,
yes.
and he lost, and his sort of speech after it around saying sorry to the country for letting everyone down, and so when we working with athletes, working with high performers, performance means so much to them. It's often their identity, it's connected to their self-worth, and so when they're not performing well, it means more to them than just not performing well. It often connects to how they see themselves and how others see them, and so it's quite deeply performance can be quite
Absolutely.
Deeply personal, and have we attach so much meaning to it, in terms of people's lives. And so, when we talk about winning and losing out on the football field, it's more than that. And so that's where, for players and for teams, it's helping them understand the meaning of performance, and that ability when they get out there to be able to play with freedom, to be able to be in the moment, be really focused on the task. And we talk about sport being a game and just playing, and that joy and enjoying the moment, rather than protecting self. And I think recalling that conversation that we had and the time it was, when we think back to Carlton a couple of years ago, they'd had such, I guess, a history of not performing well, and so for our players, they were really connected to that history, and they hadn't experienced winning enough, and even when they were out there, I guess a lot of history, a lot of fear sort of really bubbled to the surface. And so a lot of those, I think the history was what was sort of holding them back. That was the barrier and the fear of letting other people down. Yeah, and that's exactly how you described it at the time. It was that history and almost like that legacy, and it's, I don't know, is it something going through their mind that's, are we good enough, or is it that we revert back because we get, I don't know, gun shy sort of thing? Yeah, we go into protection mode, survival mode. Yeah, I think that's what we revert back to. And I think even if you think about the season right now, is that, and this is what we see with teams, there's ebbs and flows. We see teams with a bit of momentum and a bit of freedom, and then teams can have this period where, you know, they might not be in form, or there is a bit of a barrier that's holding them back, and a lot of the time it's themselves. And how the team is thinking and feeling. You know, it often is mindset, because, and that's what's really interesting about performance, is from week to week, physically nothing changes. You know, they might have a few more bumps and bruises and be sore, or, you know, injuries happen, but really from a capacity and a skill set, nothing changes from week to week. What often changes is mindset, and how they're thinking and feeling.
And is it something, working as closely as you do with the players, I know, and our organisation's only very small in comparison, but I know at times I can walk into the office and feel a certain vibe, and there's other times when it feels a little flat.
Yes.
So is the football club the same? Can you feel that, sense that perhaps something's not quite right?
Absolutely. It's, you know, emotions are contagious, and that's why we talk a lot about, in team environments, our emotions and how we turn up is really important, because the people around us, they catch that emotion, they feel the energy, and we often, I guess, joke in football clubs is after a loss, it feels like almost someone's died. Like it's almost like we're at a funeral the next day, and it's such a roller coaster. In sport, we see, you know, we really experience the highs and the lows, again at an individual, but as a team we all feel it. Yeah.
I guess, rightly or wrongly, I was doing a performance review of somebody at work, and he's an introverted sort of gentleman. Only a young guy, but a bit of an introvert. And the way I explain it to him is that, you know, when I get to the top of our second flight of stairs and I'm about to open the door, for me it's like game time, right? It's like, it doesn't matter what's going on, doesn't matter how I'm feeling, if I'm feeling sad or this or that. When I walk into the door, I understand as one of the leaders that, you know, I walk in, it's hello, how you going, etc., etc. I mean, firstly, is that the right sort of attitude? Because I guess people go, well, you're almost being false. But as you said, I mean, you know, emotions are catchy. So is that a similar thing that you would promote in here? It's like, come in, be positive and feed off one another? Or
we talk a lot about being present, and being really mindful of, I guess, your behaviour and the influence on others, and that can be really, I guess, challenging. Even if I reflect on this season, in terms of, you know, we've got two teams really. We've got our AFL team and our VFL team that are obviously coexisting together, and so it's this squad mentality. And so, you know, we can have different results each week in terms of how our AFL team and VFL team is going, and so we've got to be really mindful on the environment and the environment we're creating, particularly as staff. I think staff are probably more mindful of it than our players, is because as staff, I mean, we're not out there on the field, and so there's only certain things that we can control, and our environment we can control. And so the environment that we provide our players, we determine the conditions. And so as staff, as leaders, when we step into that environment, we can set the tone. You know, when we sort of talk about emotions and energy being contagious, we can lead that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So your advice to anybody who's leading a team would be what?
I think self-awareness is probably one of the most important skills that I think that a leader needs to have. They need to be aware of themselves, aware of their behaviour, and I think, again, when you're aware and really present, again, you can be aware of how other people are going as well, and being able to sort of check in and pick up, you know, in terms of the environment. And I think, you know, being self-aware, being present can be really, really challenging in a performance environment, because performance environment, there's pressure, there's expectations, and often when we're under pressure, our focus tends to go inward. You know, we focus on the self, and so when we're in this sort of performance arena, that ability to get outside of yourself, be really present, that's actually quite challenging.
Yes,
challenging to do. And so, as a leader, I think they're important skills to have as a starting point.
Yeah. I just want to touch on social media a little bit, because I know the effect we have if one of our ex-contractors does a Google review and it's not positive. We take it quite personally, right? And it's almost, well, it does feel personal, I guess, because we know what we stand for as an organisation and who we are as people. And look, I've got no doubt, absolutely, without a doubt, we don't do everything right or as well as we should. But I can't help but think of the players, and I mean, and they get so much external noise.
Yes.
And I'm thinking that perhaps you must play a fairly big part in trying to, well, I don't know, in trying to help them overcome it. So do you mind talking me through that?
Yeah, it's definitely a really a bigger and more important part of the modern game in terms of what our modern day footballers have to deal with. And I think it connects to some of the things that we've already spoken about, that performance is deeply personal.
Yes.
So when there is feedback, in terms of social media, it's hard not for the it's hard for the players not to take it personally, because their performance is so deeply personal. I think we don't have a great internal measuring stick. So we often look to the external world to measure ourselves, to validate us, and so it is really tricky when players, when people, they go to social media and sort of the external world to measure themselves, and if it's negative, it can really erode that self-confidence and self-belief. And I guess for me, in terms of my role, it's really about working with players in terms of developing their own internal measuring stick. Is how do they want to measure themselves, and that's where values become really important, in terms of, because performance changes from week to week. So if we're going to measure ourselves on performance, that's going to be pretty shaky, because performance with footballers, it changes from week to week, and so their self-esteem and how they measure themselves, how they see themselves, is going to change from week to week. Whereas values don't change, from week to week. That's a really solid foundation to have. And so, really encouraging our players to have values, to be committed to their values, to measure themselves according to values, and also, I guess, to have a really small circle. Brené Brown sort of talks about a board of advisors, and so to make sure that players have got their own board of advisors, the people that they trust and that they go to, and we really focus on eyes in, really making sure that the feedback comes from within the four walls, more from a confidence and a belief point of view. I think the other thing that's really important is where confidence comes from is doing the work. And so making sure that our players focus on doing the work, building their skills, building their competency, so that the belief and trust is there, that they are good enough. And then an understanding that in terms of social media, the external world, they've also got a job to do, and understanding that there's a place for that. And so we need to acknowledge that it's there, but they don't need to let it into their internal world. It's not a reflection of them personally, it's a reflection of performance. Performance is something that we do, it's not who we are.
Good on you.
Yeah.
And I guess that applies, and you touched on this earlier, in relation to, I see so many people go through business and they may have elevated themselves to a certain status within an organisation, and that becomes their identity. It's like, I'm the CEO, or I'm the COO, or I'm the MD, and next minute their retirement, and they have this tremendous void, and it's like they don't know who they really are, because it's all wrapped around that.
Yes.
And does that occur the same way for young footballers?
Absolutely.
Who perhaps,
Absolutely. Their identity is so tightly linked to performance. And that's why they ride the roller coaster. And it's really tricky to separate, that, because when you're in a performance environment and wanting to do well at something, you invest a lot of time and energy, and so it becomes, again, that becomes deeply personal. So it's something that I think players when they arrive at the football club, they've already got that mindset, and so it's really trying to work with that, and then we often see it with that transition out as well, which is what you're talking about in terms of retirement and things like that, is trying to prepare them for that, because they're going to have a change of identity and a void, as you said, so preparing them for that.
Yeah. So we spoke about the exposure to social media. Does that vary more for an established player? Patrick Cripps is a known champion. He's a Brownlow medalist. Really, he performs week in, week out. He may perform slightly more, slightly less, but versus someone who's trying to be established. So does that provide greater input or lesser input or whatever?
Absolutely, because I think our players that are more established, the further down their career, they've got a stronger internal measuring stick. They know where they're at, and they've got the evidence that they are good enough. I think it's probably our younger players, our fringe players that are trying to establish themselves and into the team, that they're probably more vulnerable to it, because they're still figuring out whether they're good enough, and so they really do look to the external world for validation. I guess the other thing with it that comes to mind too, and with your story before around sort of having that void, is that we have rising aspirations. It's this idea, and it's really important for us to have rising aspirations. It's good for our survival. We're really goal orientated. We strive. We're ambition, and that's good for us, because complacency and being still, that's not so good for survival and for performance. And so having these rising aspirations is really important. But unfortunately, then we get caught in this trap that nothing's ever good enough, and if only we perform at this level, then we'll be happy, or if only I can, I make this much money, then I'll be happy. If I get the new house or the new car, and we've all experienced it, we get a new watch and it's really nice for a day, and then the next day it's, we're a bit bored with it. It's okay, we're on to the next. And so that's also a challenging part of, I think, being in a high performance or a performance environment, is we're constantly striving, and it's good for us, but there's also a flip side to it too that we've got to manage.
I guess you get to a certain age, you meet an awful lot of people, Tarah, and I at times admire people who are happy with not much. And it's okay, whereas I see high achievers and they're constantly never happy, because they're never quite getting there. They achieve something, as you said, you achieve something, and then you get to the next thing, and then you want the next thing. And it's not even about wanting. I think it's this need to continue to improve and succeed. What would you say to them?
Well, that's the population I work with predominantly, is those sort of high-performing individuals, and that's where I've always, it's a double-edged sword. That drive is what gets them there. It's what gets them into these elite, high-performing environments. But there's a dark side to it too. It's their superpower, but also their Achilles heel. And it's not about fixing it. It's about being aware of it, understanding it, and learning how to manage it, learning where that dark side, when it pops up and can get in the way. And if sort of going back to the start of our conversation around when we were talking about, teams, and individuals fearing failure, fearing success, that's part of when it shows up, is that, when they don't perform well, again, it means so much more, and it means, it's a reflection of them, and it's because they want it so badly. And they're chasing it, that it means more than what it actually, is in a way.
We've spoken about fear of failure and fear of success. And is there a difference between the two?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, fear of failure. I don't believe failure exists. You never fail. It's always, it's a learning opportunity. In sport, we look at losing as a failure, but really what it is you've just lost a game. There's always next week. And even in terms of when we think about the season and where teams finish, again, nothing's ever a failure. It's an opportunity to learn, it's an opportunity to advance. Often when we lose or we don't do well at something, it's a really teachable moment. But again, the fear of failure is that, if someone loses, again, it means so much more than what it actually is, that it's somehow related to them. And again, it's the meaning we attach to, losing, or if someone wants to use the word failure, is it's what it means to them, is that, and often when you talk to players around fear of failure, it's the consequences of failure in their eyes. It's, what does this mean? Does this mean that I'm not going to get another contract? Does this mean I don't get selected? Does this mean my family, I'm not making my family proud, or, how other people are going to now see me? It's the consequences of failure. And it's also the same in terms of success, and again, we probably connect winning to success, but it's, what does that mean? What are the consequences of winning or succeeding?
Yeah.
That often when you start succeeding, there's all these extra expectations, or the expectations rise, that you've got to then maintain that level of success and winning. And how do you do that? Yeah. So really when we're talking about that, it's the consequences of that, and what it means.
So that's what makes people fearful.
Yeah.
And why would they be fearful of success then? Why would that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I with athletes that I've worked with and tried to really delve into understanding that, it's again what success brings.
Okay.
That, for elite athletes, there's often more media. There's more opportunities that maybe they don't necessarily want.
Okay.
It's probably more about that they've got to maintain that level of performance.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do.
And is there is there a burden with family as well? So when I think of a business, very often there's a succession, dad's successful, mum's successful, business is successful, somebody needs to come through, and all of a sudden that person coming through feels that pressure.
Absolutely.
And that burden.
Yes, it's the expectation.
Yeah, it's about the
expectation. And then what it now means. Yeah. I
don't know whether you get involved in the recruitment side of things, but obviously in business we use psychometric type tests, etc. Do you get involved firstly in the recruitment, and do you test young players or young recruits' mindsets and resilience, or
Yes. Often when people find out my role and what I do, they think that, they often ask me, in terms of our off season, that it must be nice to have a bit of time off, whereas really our off season is our recruiting season, and it's actually our busiest time of the year. So all our draftees do psychometric testing, and that's really one piece of the puzzle, is that the AFL conduct psychometric testing, and then the club psychologists analyse the psychometrics, but we also, I guess, do a lot of in terms of behavioural observations, behavioural evidence. So we do a lot of interviewing, a lot of background checks and things like that. And then we provide a recommendation to the recruiters, and the recruiters obviously use that information in conjunction, with medical information, with football skills, all those sorts of things. And as the game keeps progressing, it's becoming more and more important.
Yeah. What do you look for?
Probably the number one quality characteristic that I look for is that self-drive.
Yeah.
I think in terms of a performance environment, if you don't have self-drive, it can be really hard to survive the environment. Probably the second thing is resilience.
Yeah. Being
able to cope. So I think self-drive is about being able to thrive. The resilience is, are you able to survive and cope with the environment? the third thing is really sort of that cultural fit. So interpersonal skills, are they going to be able to fit within the environment? And probably the last thing is really that coachability, you know, their ability to learn, openness, curiosity, the way that they think. Are they going to be able to continue to develop and progress within the environment and fulfill their potential?
Yeah. And you do that on an ongoing basis? So you do one at the start, you then do it every year or every periodically?
Yeah, I have at certain times, having a look at our current playing group and using psychometrics to get an idea of what our current group is at, and that can be good from a recruiting point of view as well, to sort of in terms of our draftees, are they going to be a good fit with our current playing group, but also to see how the players continue to grow and develop as people.
Does it vary generationally?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in AFL for 15 years, and I've seen differences or changes as I've gone along. I've also seen a change after COVID as well, and we're starting to see, in terms of our young people coming through, what that period of time potentially, the effect that it had. So that's an interesting watch at the moment.
Yeah. Are you able to share some of that with us, like what you've observed?
Yeah, one of the major things that I've noticed is probably more around the educational side of it, is that I think that our young people, because of online learning, there was a bit of a disengagement with school, and I'm not sure whether they got that back. And so a lot of our young people coming through are sort of doing ungraded VCE and VCAL and things like that. So the educational side I'm noticing.
Does that, sorry Tarah, does that make them more difficult, less difficult? How does that reflect in their football ability, let's say, becoming a great footballer?
Yeah. Well, I think there's two parts of it. Is that, you know, we want our players coming in as very open, curious. Really, when we talk about the football environment, it is like a school environment. You know, there's lots of meetings, there's lots of learning, and so being good learners and engaged learners, I think, is really important. I think the danger for me is that they've really narrowed their identity to football. And when players come into our environment, we start preparing them for the transition on the first day that they arrive.
Is that right?
Yeah. So the athletic career is quite short. So we prepare them for life after football as soon as they walk in. So if they've really narrowed their identity, and you know, you sort of the saying, put all your eggs into one basket. When they walk in, we then ask them to broaden their identity, because we have a really strong focus on dual career. They're playing football, but we also encourage our players to make sure that, you know, to be studying, to be planning for their life after sport. What's their career going to be after sport? It's also good for performance in the here and now, is that they've got balance, you know, and off-field focus as well. So it's not just football. When we have players that are really narrowly just focused on football, actually they don't perform as well.
It's interesting, isn't it? And that comes back to the boxer last. I actually saw the boxing last night.
Yes.
And I saw the interview live.
Yep.
And just as a layperson, I couldn't help but feel concerned for that young man when he's going. The very first things out of his mouth almost were, I'm now concerned about my headspace.
Yes.
And I think that as a parent and as a leader at work, there's no doubt that mental health is a major issue for all of us.
Yes.
So once again, I mean, if you were to give me some advice on how to best handle that, or what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think it comes back to my point before around awareness. I think, again, being really aware and present and outside of yourself, so that you're aware of the people around you. And when you're present and aware, you're more likely to observe, the people that you're working with, if there's been a change in behaviour, a change in demeanour, and checking in and asking, are they okay? I think as a leader, as anyone that's sort of supporting, managing, coaching, the role, there's an emotional element and a cognitive element to what we do, is that emotionally checking in with people, how are they going, particularly if they're not themselves. And then there's again a cognitive side of it in terms of checking in with how they're thinking, how they're seeing things. Is there an opportunity to reframe, redirect, refer on, getting them to be more aware of how they're being perceived. And I think that's our role, when we're working and supporting people, is both that emotional side, the cognitive side. But mental health and wellbeing from a performance point of view it's the foundation of performance. Yeah. We've got to make sure that our people are well before we can expect them to perform.
Yeah.
Is my experience has been that, performers, they can, and mental health is very dynamic. We all move up and down that continuum, and I've seen high performers also experiencing mental ill health at the same time, but it's hard work. And so, really investing in that mental health and wellbeing space, I think, is really important for performance, because it's the foundation. And I think as leaders, it's about modelling that. It's about checking in with your people and making sure that, again, that environment that that we can control, we can sort of set the conditions, is that we're making sure that the environment is also supporting them as well, their mental health and wellbeing.
The touching base is really, it's one of the things that I pride myself in.
Yeah.
Right. What I find is that either people are not used to having someone seriously touch base with them, look them in the eye and go, are you okay? Or I've noticed something. Because inevitably people walk out of my office constantly crying, right?
Yeah.
So from my point of view, I almost feel bad about asking, because I don't want to bring them down, and I don't feel like they're down, Tarah, but I feel like they're touched in a particular way, that somebody's actually observed and seen it. I mean, people must go through life thinking nobody ever sees them.
Yeah.
Truly sees them. Everybody goes, how you going? Yeah, good. And I really don't care what the answer is, but it's just social protocol. How can I handle that better?
Yeah. And I think, to your point, we all are quite egocentric. People, we do tend to worry about ourselves, and so, in terms of what you're feeling there, I think it is actually correct. A lot of the time we don't feel seen, and it is unusual, I think, when people do sort of check in with you, and it is easy just to say, I'm all good, but when I think people know when someone is genuinely checking in with them, and as you said, you see them, you've noticed that there is a change. We've also got to be careful, I think, in work environments as well, is because sometimes when we do check in, and if people do disclose what's going on for them, it's then what do we do next? Absolutely. And that's always the concern, isn't it? Yeah. And I think that's sometimes why people don't go there either. If things do come up, what do I do next? Because you can't unhear things. No. And so making sure, again, that you know what to do next in terms of referring to professional support if that's needed. And I think in terms of your question of what you can do better is making sure that you've got those support systems around, that you've got it on speed dial, whether they can connect to if they need some extra extra support. It's often that follow-up, that next step that people probably don't do well.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's great advice. Yep. Thank you.
It was lovely to chat.
It was lovely to chat with you. Thank you very, very much once
worries.
again.